and beaches. So as Hannah said before, I'm currently working at the Ulster University in Northern Ireland in UK with Derek Jackson and Andrew Cooper. The results I'm going to present you today are extracted from the paper recently published in Earth Science Reviews called Multiple Inter-Tidal Bars and Beaches, a review. I know that Anna sent you the link with the link to connect you to the Zoom today. So if you have any further questions, even later on, don't hesitate to send an email or anything. So to start with a bit of context, I'm working here in Dungeon Bay, Northern Ireland, and it's a very nice and wide beach, which presents that type of feature that are called region runnels. And when we started to work on region runnels in Dungeon Bay, I looked into the bibliography and I realized that intertidal systems are way less studied than the subtidal ones, but also that there were multiple definitions to describe region runnel systems in the literature, but they were describing different morphologies that will differ in terms of genetics and physical processes. And I realized that it's leading to a lot of misunderstanding about the mechanism involved in the region runnel genesis, but also on their evolution at different timescales. So in our review, we worked with 93 previous paper and 67 different study sites to examine globally the region runnel features. We wanted to identify and define more precisely what are region runnels features, but also to review their morpholodynamic to short from long-term scales, and to identify what are the main parameters driving the morphodynamics. We wanted also to look at the potential global distribution around the world. So first, the definitions of the actual definitions of region runnels. So there are two main definitions. The one is called the Biausque, and it has been proposed by King and WiIliams in 1949, and it's based on genetics and physical processes. They describe 2 to 6 intertidal bars parallel to the shore, made from fine to medium grain sand, and found for low gradient beaches under macrotidal conditions and limited fetch. They also talked about sufficient sediment supply. The second definition, called the North American scale from Hayes in 1967, it's a morphological based definition. So basically, every morphologies which are associated with onshore sandbar migration will fit into that definition. For them, region runnels will be a result of nearshore adjustments of an excess of sediment under different wave climates. Therefore, the ridge will be linked to post-storm low energy conditions, and the runnels will be the limit between the landward slope of the ridge and the old storm eroded beach profile. But according to lots of paper and literature, the Biausque has to be followed if we want to talk about region runnels. So in some papers, they call the Biausque definition the true region runnels definition. But if you look at the literature, there are lots of different nomenclature used to describe those features, going through intertidal bar and through intertidal bars, low amplitude ridges, multiple intertidal bars, and region runnels. And when I started to look a bit more into the region runnel sections, I realized that only 66% of those paper were using the definition region runnels as the one originally presented by King and WiIliams in 1949. So we realized that even today, the definition of region runnels is still very ambiguous and is confusing for describing all of the mechanism linked to those features. And then that we needed a better and a universal nomenclature to describe true region runnels. And in 2002, Cohn and Masling proposed the term multiple intertidal bars. They described the multiple intertidal bars as a succession of intertidal bars, morphologically analogous to the description by King and WiIliams. The main difference between the definition by King and WiIliams and the description of Kuhn and Maslink is linked to the tidal range. Kuhn and Maslink saw that meso to macrotidal environments could be concerned by those type of features, and that only a tidal range higher than 3 meters was important. In 2011, Scott et al. Described more the MITB characteristics, and we find the same definition that was originally proposed by King and WiIliams: a gentle slope, an intertidal beach width between 300 and 800 meters, 3 to 6 intertidal sandbars parallel to the shore, with cross-shore drainage channel cutting them, low amplitude region not exceeding 1 meter, and low energy wave climate under more than 3 meter tidal range. And so we thought that MITB might be a preferable nomenclature to describe true rigid runnels at this very close to the original definition, but also is less restrictive in term of tidal range. Now I'm going to talk about the genesis of MITB, but I'm going to go quite quick because it's still under discussion. There are just hypotheses because MITBs are permanent to semi-permanent intertidal morphologies. So far, nobody has been able to directly observe those genesis in the field, but also there have not been effectively modeled so far. There is therefore, however, 4 main hypotheses. The first one is the breakpoint bars or the convergence model. Second one, the swash bar formation model, then the long wave processes formation, and the combined swash and subzone processes. The 3 first hypotheses have been discussed, and it seems that they are not possible, but the combined swash and subzone processes seems to be today the best hypothesis to describe MITB's genesis. It has been described for the first time by Carter in 1988. He thought that both swash and subzone processes will have to work together to be able to generate multiple intertidal bars. According to him, the bar formation will be initiated in the subzone depending on water levels, and to maintain those bars, we will need the swash mechanism. This hypothesis has been further described by Maslink and Anthony. So they came to the conclusion that the subzone processes were the main parameter to initiate MITB formation. And during energetic conditions, during NIP to mid-high tide, the period will be long enough to maintain a mid-tide level under stationary conditions on the subzone, which is the main parameter, according to them again, to initiate MITB formation. Also, they found out that if surf processes and swash processes work together, then the bars were surviving decreasing energetic conditions. And that will be a result between as an equilibrium between the fast tidal translation rates and the longer adaptation time for the bars to react to the change in water levels. In 2002, Kuhn and Maslink, through a field experiment in England, look at the different processes, so swash, surf, and shoaling, at different time from NIP to spring tidal cycle. And they found out that every ridge on the profile will be concerned by those 3 processes at one special time during NIP to spring tidal cycle. And they also saw that those processes will drive different sediment transport, which will lead to stabilization of the MITB features. In 2004, Maslink again proposed a numerical model to look at the formation, evolution, and stabilization of those features. And according to his model, 3 main mechanisms are essential for the formation of MITBs. The first one will be low energetic conditions in the surf zone to drive onshore sediment transport. but also the presence of separate cross-shore sediment transport cells to lead to convergence points and then be able to form those different bars, but also a bit of self-organization. So according to Maslink, MITB will be a combination between swash and breaker bars. And the surf and the swash processes are acting all along the profile to initiate and maintain those features. They also talk about a strong longshore currents into the runnels would increase the runnels erosion and therefore enhance the ridge's amplitude. Now I'm going to talk about the review on morphodynamics of MITBs, going from very short-term periods to higher and longer terms features. So the first morphodynamics I'm going to talk about are the single tidal cycles. So there is a link between the single tidal cycles and the position of the water level along the profiles. And those positions of the different water levels will drive different sediment transport cells and therefore different hydrodynamic mechanisms. And the changes in water levels will lead to a migration along the profile of those dynamic processes. Those changes of hydrodynamic processes will lead to changes in cross-shore sediment transport rates and direction. Those morphodynamics, those MITB features are found for large tidal range, as we've seen, more than 3 meters, which means that there are rapid shifts in water levels along a single tidal cycle, which leads to a very high impact on the relaxation time periods of each bar to respond to those changes. So the morphological range change rates of those bars will completely depend on the active periods of the different processes acting on them, surf or swash processes. But in general, the morphological changes recorded during single tidal cycles are mostly located on the crest of the ridges. If we look now at the lunar tidal cycles, so spring to nip to spring tides, the period, again, the period of activation of activity of swash and surf processes on the bars will depend on nip and spring tides. For example, spring tides means a big tidal range, so faster migration of the processes along the profile. And we've seen that each set of processes are located at specific location along the profiles. In 2020, Brand et al. Also proved that nip tides were dominated by cross-shore wave and disk currents, while spring tides were dominated by alongshore tidal currents, leading to different sediment transports from nip to spring tides. Onshore migration of ridges has been locally observed. They are controlled by surf processes. So there is an erosion of the seawall slope and a transported deposition of the sediment on the landward slope. Therefore, the cross-shore variability, there is also a very important cross-shore variability along the profile at the middle and the upper ridges are more mobile than the lower one. So during lunar tidal cycles, MITB are very, very dynamic features, and the upper ridges migration rates are related to wave energy, but also tidal elevation. And when we look at the wave energy, we obviously look at then at the seasonal morphodynamics. And under high energy conditions, flattening of ridges leading to a smoother bridge profile has been widely supported and reported. But in the north of France, few studies reported the stability of MITB even during high energy conditions. But to date, we still don't know if it's due to specificities of the sites or because they are all located in the north of France, or if it's something that could be more global. So anyway, what has been widely supported is that there is an erosion of the ridges during high energy conditions, and that's those morphological changes or driven by surf processes. But this erosion of the crest is also increased under high energy wave and high water levels. On the contrary, for calmer conditions, there is a development and an accretion of the ridges that has been reported, and the most seawall intertidal bar seems to act as the buffer protecting all the inner bars. There is also some sediment transport from the seawall slope toward the crests, leading to an onshore migration toward the upper beach of the bars. So the MITB behavior, the seasonal MITB behavior is mostly a combination of wave energy and water levels again. But the mobility of regions within the seasons also drives the variability of the seasonal response of the upper beach and the dune. A higher mobility of the bar will lead to a stronger response of the beach, of the dune and the upper beach to the seasonality. Sorry. Now, if we look at a longer term morphodynamics, so I told you before that they are considered that as very stable features, and those permanence of a MITB morphology could be linked to a shelter location. They are quite protected for extreme conditions, but also the fact that there's a succession of sandbars. So even during stormy conditions, they are acting as buffer, dissipating the wave energy. The permanence of MITB also depends on the storm characteristics, has the amplitude, the frequency, but also the direction, and the relaxation time of the ridges to respond to hydrodynamic condition changes. In 2009, Sasa and Waterby also proposed that there was a feedback between the suction processes and the sediment transport. They ran a model using suction processes and another without the suction processes, and they saw that the suction processes seems to be key parameter to maintain the position of the bars and the stability of the features. There is something that also has been talked about on a very long term morphodynamic. It's about the longshore drainage channel migration, which looks to be linked to some seasonal coastal migration of bars. And recently in 2019, Mice et al. Showed that there was a net onshore migration of the bar. They used 17 years of LiDAR data set and proved that there was a net onshore migration. So we still don't know again if it's site specific, if it can be global, because there is a huge lag in the long-term data set to better characterize and analyze MITB behavior. But what is commonly supported now is that there are long-term stationary structures, but seasonal migration of individual bars are reported. So we could call that like a dynamic equilibrium. So it's an apparent equilibrium, an apparent stability of the feature. Now, what controls the MITB distribution and the morphology? In 2002, Dawson et al. Proposed that the number of bars would increase with the intertidal width, more space to create more bars, and decrease linked to a higher beach slope. So using the 49 study sites, we did that scatter plot to look at the number of bars and to see if they were related to the beach slope and the intertidal width or the tidal range. And according to our plot, there is no straightforward relationship between those parameters. However, a very high number of bars look to be related to low angle beach slopes and relatively wide intertidal beaches. So the observation of Dawson looks to be site specific if we look on the global literature. Now we wanted to know if there was a relationship between the presence or not of MITB, the beach slope, and tidal conditions, but also local wave characteristics. So we plot once on the top the presence of MITB or not related to the slope and the significant wave height, and on the bottom the slope and the peak period. And there is no clear relationship between the beach slope and a significant wave height, but there is a relationship with the peak period, and the high MITBs are found for a beach slope lower than 0.02 degrees and a peak period between 2 and 8 seconds. And if you look at the plot above those thresholds, there is no morphologies reported. Now we wanted to look at the same type of plot, but instead of looking at the slope, looking at the tidal range this time. And again, there is no relationship with the wave height, but the peak period seems to play a key role in the presence of MITB. So if we look at this plot, which is a summary of the different parameters that are key to define the presence or not of MITB, so the slope, the period, and the tidal range, seems that MITB are well developed for a tidal range between 3 and 10 meters, wave peak periods between 3 and 8 seconds, and intertidal beach slope lower than 2.02 degrees. And what surprised us was the importance of the peak period, because usually when you look at the wave parameters or the wave characteristic, you look at the HS. And this time, the wave height didn't seem to play a role in the dynamic of MITB, well, in the presence or not of MITB, but the peak period seems to be the key parameter here. So why looking at the global distribution and why the potential formation? It's first because, as I said before, we have a lag in the data set, and it will be interesting to have a more representative of MITB around the world. But what do we need? We need threshold in wave characteristic, mostly the peak period, the tidal range, and the intertidal beach slope, as I said before. But also the sediment grid size has to be fine to medium to the bars to be stable. And we also look at the position, well, their location in the world, and it seems that they are always located near river mouth or tidal inlets. This has not been explicitly examined before, but that could be linked to what we call the sufficient sediment supply that is needed to the formation and the long-term stability of this feature. But so far, we don't really know anything about that. So how to predict the global occurrence and the potential formation of MITB? We will still need field observation regarding the grain size, the form of the grain size, etc. But as we are using more and more remote sensing, and we are going through an evolution of the science for the last years, that the recent progress in wave modeling at different time scales and spatial scales, but also the better analysis of the worldwide tidal range, and now the improvement in satellite images, quality and resolution that we've seen with the paper from Vos et al., that we can now extract the beach slope from satellite images, so we can have information of those 3 key parameters to potentially be able to locate MITB features and then try to work on that with satellite images or try to go on the field when possible. So to conclude, we proposed this diagram. So it's basically a summary of what I've presented so far: the forcing, the processes, the sediment transport, and the morphological changes. But what is important to look at now is that every time scales leads to a specific response of the system as I have presented all during all that presentation. But all the time scales are interlinked. So tidal cycles will have an impact on the duration of surf and swash processes, which leads to the seasonal morphodynamics, which will drive the long short-term evolution of MITB. So all this, those interactions lead to a dynamic equilibrium and an apparent long-term stability. So there's still lots of uncertainties and slight questions. We still don't know for sure how MITB features are formed. And there is also a big question about the longshore sediment circulation. Has the cross-shore sediment transport has been widely studied, and the cross-shore migration of the bars has been overlooked a lot, but the longshore sediment transport, circulation and transport has been fully studied so far. And the role of the drainage channel and cross-shore irregularities is also something that has not been really looked before. We know that they are linked with cross-shore sediment transport and longshore bar migration, but we still so far don't know if there is some sort of coupling between the bars runnel and the drainage channel, or if there is some sort of independence. it's still something that is not explicitly, has been not explicitly studied, and we still really don't know how does it work. And the last part, as I said before, is about the sediment supply. So first of all, we have no idea what is the sufficient sediment supply, what does that mean? What are the sources of the sediment supply? But also, what is the role of these sediments on different time scales for the genesis, the stabilization, but also the destabilization of those features? For example, MITBs have been reported for environment in erosion, neutral, or in accretion. So far, we really don't know what is the role of this sediment supply, and if it's more important for the genesis or if it's still really important for the stabilization of those features. Thank you very much.
Thanks to you, Melanie. Thanks for a super interesting talk, because we learned a lot about those systems, and as you said, there is a lot of confusion. So it was really interesting to hear a comprehensive view of the problem, and also nice how you put together the data from the different studies.
Thank you.
And we begin to see when we